All right, welcome everyone to the Veterans Psychedelic Discourse. We're a group that advocates for safe and responsible exploration of mental health treatments. This is not a platform for solicitation of illegal substances. So today we have our microdose discussion. Feel free to raise your hand and drop some questions at any time. Today we're going to have Blaine and John joining us today. Blaine's been with PPS since 2014, and he's a self-proclaimed neuroscience nerd. Is that correct? And then John, you've been with PPS since early 2020. Having explored psychedelics for over 50 years. And John is experienced in utilizing these tools to bring personal transformations. And John is involved with microdosing discussion, Reimagining Chronic Pain, and Psychedelic Elders Gathering Zooms. And he's witnessed firsthand how microdosing can positively impact people's lives. So we're going to hear what they have to say, get some insights, and then feel free to ask some questions that you may have about that you might have about your own practice, or any urgent questions for potential future use. So just to kick off, since we're talking about microdosing, John and Blaine, I'm curious to hear what you guys have to say first off on the benefits, because when I think of psychedelics, I think when a lot of people think of psychedelics, they're like, okay, magic bullet that's going to turn my life around. I'm no longer going to have ego. I'm going to shed I'm going to shed my sins, and I'm going to be on the right path. Psychedelics is not a magic bullet. It's something that's to be taken with intention. And then a lot of people use microdosing to kind of apply these things in a day-to-day with a lot less of an impactful experience, but impactful nonetheless. Can you talk a little bit about just the purpose for it and maybe appropriate methods and application?
Yeah, that's a lot. And certainly, let me define, I guess, first of all, what a microdose is versus other doses. A microdose, well, let's look at the typical, what would be called a macrodose or a clinical dose, is typically 3.5 to 5 grams of dried psilocybin mushroom. The LSD, and these are the only two drugs we'll be talking about today, is LSD and psilocybin. LSD, the standard dose is 100 to 125 micrograms. That's 1/1000th of the normal. Well, anyway, microgram versus milligram, we'll get into that later. The low dose for psilocybin would be 1.5 grams, maybe 2. Typically, that's a different animal, and we'll talk about a little bit about that later. A microdose is 1/10 either of LSD, the standard dose of LSD, or the standard dose of psilocybin. So with psilocybin, the standard dose, clinical dose being 3.5 to 5, you'd come back 1/10 of that would actually be 350 to half a gram. That is a lot for a microgram. Typically, we actually go lower than that. People start at 50 milligrams per, we said microgram there, I apologize. 50 milligrams to 100 milligrams for a microdose. That's a beginning stage. I personally have gone as high as 300 milligrams. I know a number of people who do 200 milligrams a day. Currently, I'm doing 200 milligrams a day. I'm doing 100 in the morning and 100 in the evening. That's just what I do, and we'll talk about protocols and that kind of stuff in a little bit also. You'll hear about heroic doses, and typically for psilocybin, that's going above 5 grams. And anything above a microdose. A low dose, you're going to get some effects. You're going to be feeling some effects of it. With a microdose, typically, it's meant to be subperceptual. In other words, you do not get any hallucinatory or feelings of being high, etc. You've got it on board. It's doing its work, but it's doing it very subtly, and that's one of the main things you need to think about, is that this is really subtle. For microdosing to work, you need to track what's going on, write in a journal, record your whatever, and I'll put up a chart or a little graph. Your protocol, and I'm going to say this really quickly, when you're doing microdosing, you are the patient, you are the physician, and you are the pharmacist. You're the one who knows what's wrong, what needs to be fixed, what you want to work on. And really what we're talking about is working on doing microdosing as a practice. It's not just a one-time thing. It's not a one-time shot. And you work with, say, a coach or a therapist, etc., for integration work, which is important. And you do integration work with microdosing, but you do it in a different way. It's pretty much your own. It is your own practice. And when I say practice, you're going to be integrating it into the practices that you continue to do for your self-care in your life, your meditation, journaling, if you do that. If you don't, highly recommend it for microdosing, so you can see over time the changes. Um, uh, Exercise, diet, all of those things are important, and this becomes part of your daily routine. Um, what else did you ask? A lot there? What else do you go ahead, Alex? Give me some questions.
Sure. Well, I think we'll be answering, I guess, those getting into these questions just from our discussion. Something I wanted to touch on is your involvement with reimagining chronic pain. And in the bio that you sent me, talked about rheumatoid arthritis. Can you speak to what the reduction of this pain, like, what does that look like? Because when I think of pain, I don't think of psilocybin as being the answer to that. Can you speak to how that kind of, what happens
Certainly.
there?
And I'm going to have Blaine talk about this too, because both of us have direct experience with psilocybin,
Yeah, absolutely.
helping with chronic pain. I've been dealing with severe rheumatoid arthritis since 2007. It was thrown on the fully disabled list in 2012 or 13. And just remember those dates lately because I just went back and went through my Social Security stuff and so on. Anyway, I've been through, I mean, I was walking around like a zombie from the amount of fentanyl patches and Dilaudid and morphine and oxycodone that I was taking, not always at the same time, but often at least 3 of those at the same time. Just stupid. I mean, stupid. Not able to do hardly anything, and still being in pain. Since I have stumbled across microdosing, and I have to say, I do this in combination with CBD and THC. I have been able to reduce, I don't do any opiates. No, excuse me, I do opiates, only morphine, and I don't do any opioids, which are that wide gamut of synthetic opioids. The morphine, anyway, of any type of opioid medication, I reduced that by 90% or more. And I attribute that to psilocybin, CBD, and THC combined. I haven't gone, well, I have for short periods of time without the CBD and THC, and I've done it the other way around. And there seems to be a carryover effect because I haven't noticed an increase in my chronic pain because of that. Or, with the absence of one or the other, but they haven't been for long periods of time. They've been for a couple of weeks or so. So it's been amazing. And the people that we run into in the people that join us for the Reimagining Chronic Pain, many of them have had different but experiences much like mine. And I'll let Blaine talk to his experience directly.
All right, my good friends. Just so that only a few of you know me, I was, diagnosed with a brain tumor in 2003, had a stroke in 2006, a couple brain surgeries in 2007 to remove the tumor, and I have lived with a daily migraine ever since. So from 2007 to 2015, I spent on a couch 24/7 for literally 7, 8 years, vomiting, nausea from the pain, the suffering. Was to the point in 2014, I looked at euthanizing myself. I was on the cusp of suicidal, but I couldn't do it myself. So I was looking to Oregon's Death by Dignity or going to Switzerland and just basically ending my life because I could not take the suffering anymore. So when psychedelics came to my screen or my life in 2015, I'd already been given a couple of different ideas from my psychologist that really blew my mind, but they just never really took hold of me. And these are things that I think also hold true to PTSD and other things besides chronic pain. And one of those biggest concepts was the difference between dirty pain and clean pain. I thought all pain was the same. I didn't understand that there was this difference in dirty and clean pain. So let me just identify those two things, because I think as soon as I identify them, most people understand it, but they just don't understand that it applies to them. So clean pain is the actual nerve endings and the signals that are sent in the body from the brain to wherever the structure or whatever the thing that is causing the pain. That is clean pain. Dirty pain is the stories and the character and the ego that who we are that starts to build from that clean pain. And each one of us build different stories, and not everyone's as healthy. And usually that's why the dirty pain can be even more suffering than the clean pain. So when we talk about psychedelics and chronic pain, it's not an opiate. It's not a direct painkiller. What it does is it plays on the dirty pain, this emotional story building pain. And just to give you an idea, my father's a narcissistic racist and my mother's a narcissist. And so I had these stories in my head that anybody who's sick is faking it. Anybody who is on disability is doing it for attention. And these are the stories we build. And it doesn't matter who you are, you have these stories that are built that are inside of you from age 6 to 12, your default mode network. And once you develop a chronic pain or PTSD, these stories start to develop and get more dirty and more dirty. And this is where psychedelics come in and, in a roundabout way, scrub or clean up that dirty pain. Unconsciously clean it up without you even wanting to clean it up, just realizing that your dialogue and your stories start to have a different play. And all of a sudden you realize, holy shit, I'm not in as much pain. But I can't be without as much pain because I'm still diagnosed as I'm still disabled. So it's kind of the other side of this psilocybin or LSD or any microdosing of psychedelics and helping with chronic pain is it's very difficult to actually realize that the dirty pain is being diminished, and it's okay to be less suffering. And I just would have to leave with that is it's an uncomfortable, different feeling to allow yourself to feel less suffering. And that right there in itself is a hard speed bump to get over when it comes to pain, chronic pain. So with that said, I can leave it there, and I think we can go on to another question, but if there's need to be any more elaboration, I can definitely go on further with psychedelics and chronic pain.
My question would be, what do you guys think about the commercialization of microdosing? I mean, we had the rule changes for therapeutics at the beginning of this year. Eventually, you're probably going to be able to get a prescription for a bottle of, microdose mushrooms. And, what do you guys think about that process? The mainstream, introduction in the medical field?
Well, personally, we're just getting over the first bump, right? Oregon is in the forefront of lots of changes, but before that happens, psilocybin is going to have to be descheduled. It's going to have to be taken off the DEA scheduling. Right now it's considered a Schedule I drug, which means that there is no medical applications, and it can get you a lot of time in jail. So we're going to have to see it accepted within the medical community. Now, there are lots of trials going on with psilocybin right now, as is true with MDMA. Ketamine has been legal for some time. That I'm sort of going off into the weeds here. It's going to be interesting to see. I mean, in Oregon, we're seeing there are a number of, I think there's 6 organizations that have licenses now for, or are ready to do. I think there's 2 people actually who have actually purchased a license, which is a $10,000 cost to be a service center in order to do the psilocybin therapy as it's been defined here in Oregon. Those are businesses, and the startup costs are huge. The costs are huge. I mean, if you look at Epic's chart, I don't have it here right now, but if you look at Epic's chart in terms of what a microdose is going to cost, it's between $200 and $500 for a single microdose, depending on whether you're doing it in a group or doing it by yourself. I know that I can do a microdose for $1.50. Or, depending on if I grow my own or purchase it through a reputable dealer. I guess what I'm saying, Brian, is that it's going to be a while. And when it happens, it's going to be great. And yes, I think there's a future, probably well be past the time when I'm not walking around anymore, where people are going to be able to get psilocybin probably through a prescription. I don't think that would change for quite some time. I don't think it'll ever be an over-the-counter, but maybe, I don't know. I mean, things change pretty strict. And I'll pass it to Blaine. What are your thoughts, Blaine?
I think we have to look at 2 different things here: synthetics versus the mushroom.
Very true.
Okay. Now, when we're looking at synthetics, I can see microdosing as soon as it's scheduled, rescheduled, having an FDA approved 1 milligram, which would be 1 milligram of psilocybin is considered a microdose in synthetics. So I can see that. Now, when you're going back, I think, to Brian's question, what do I feel about the commercialization of microdosing? I am 110% for the commercialization of microdosing. For the simple fact is, if you get more people doing it, you're going to have more stories that are going to be beautiful stories of healing. And the stories that are all the naysay stories that we all have in our heads from history are going to be less and less and more faded. So we get more of this into the system, the more it's going to be a better benefit for me. Now, let's look at the percentages of psychology and actually using this medicine. 26% of Oregonians use cannabis, even though it's completely and totally legal in Oregon. So even if psilocybin was a Schedule III drug, which has medical purposes, it's just it has some attributes that we got to be careful about, I still only see about 7% of the population using psilocybin on a regular basis. And before you did this commercialization, like Brian's asking about, I think a lot of percentage of people in society that look at microdosing will never even touch it until it is commercialized, just for the simple fact of this is history of legalization. So I know some proponents of some people who are like, I don't want it to go capitalism. I'm a capitalistic lover. This is our system we work in. And in order to get these things to be affordable, they have to. And I can use cannabis again real quick, because cannabis is an example and it's still federally legal. when cannabis became legal, it was about $320 an ounce. It went up to $450 an ounce for about a year or two. And now you can get it for $40 to $50 an ounce. So about 1/8 of the price. So as John is alluding to, that microdosing currently is $200 to $500, 1/8 of that is going to be $30 to $40 a microdose. And that's doing it within a session, with somebody in the room with you. That can be affordable. So for me, I wish people would realize that we need capitalistic, as much as we don't like it, to be a part of this, to make it affordable. Unless you're going to be, again, going back to John, get to the point where you buy the spores, you buy the substrates, you put them together. 8 weeks later, you have mushrooms for pennies on the dollars. That's the most equitable and cheapest way to do it. But it's just goes back to the fact that all Oregonians can grow cannabis, but only about 5% of Oregonians actually grow cannabis. So humans want to go purchase this. And if it's commercialized and it's something they can buy in a bottle at the gas station, and it's got what is in the bottle, again, is going to be a benefit. But we can also look at another animal out there, and that's called CBD. 70% of what is on the market in CBD is snake oil. So are we going to have 70% of what's on the market in psilocybin actually going to be psilocybin? So it's just all comes down to getting the quality of medicine and knowing the medicine, what you get, and knowing your dose. So with that, I'll stop there.
I would also take it one step further. I think that once psilocybin's effects and capabilities in terms of dealing with PTSD, depression, etc., are known and used regularly in the psychoanalytic world, that there's going to be a lot more. I think that percentage is going to go higher than 7 to 10%. I think it's going to go much higher because so many people suffer from depression, and done right, psilocybin therapy doesn't have the long and debilitating side effects that the standard treatment for depression has now, SSRIs, etc. So.
Yeah, and I'd like to just drop a little bit of context that as far as like the Portland VA doing their MDMA psilocybin studies with veterans with combat PTSD, they exclusively use synthetic psilocybin. So I'm curious on how the fungus versus synthetic, how these two would play out, and just if it was to become commercialized or when it does. And the first thing that I think about is like how many people inside, not even just the state of Oregon, but in the United States, are in like mental health medication, and how many people that have been on mental health medication that have tried something like LSD, psilocybin, and had benefits to that they no longer take mental health medication, and how that would play out, and what that would mean for like the pharmaceutical industry, and just what's at the bottom of the hill when this starts to snowball. And but I'm curious, we talked a little bit about commercialization. You talked about how the benefits for like psychosomatic disease, as well as just like rheumatoid arthritis, just different types of chronic pain. I'm curious on like personal practices that you believe are necessary when involving these tools into your life. Do you have any insights that you want to be able to make sure people check the boxes on when using these?
When you're looking at a microdosing practice versus doing a macrodose,
yeah,
you're talking about microdosing. I think the first thing you want to do is ask yourself, why do I want to do this? What's going on what do I think I'm going to accomplish? And basically that's setting your intention. What do you want to do with this practice? What do you hope to have happen? Write that down. And as things go along, continue to write stuff down in terms of your mood, what happens day to day, because over time things are going to change. Microdosing is very subtle. As I said, it is supposed to be a sub-perceptual dose. So if it's sub-perceptual, how do you know that anything's going on? The only way you're going to know that is to keep a record over time. And you can do that. I'm kind of lazy when it comes to writing. So journaling isn't one of the things that I have done throughout my life. But lately, I've been using my phone and recording on a daily basis what I'm doing, what my dose is, when I'm taking it, time of day, how I'm feeling then, any changes from the last day or so. Now I take my personal regimen is 5 days on and 2 days off. That's my protocol. Many people do it many different ways, and the dosage that they take changes also. And this mine has changed over time. I've taken it 1 day on, 1 day off. I've taken it 2 days on, 1 day off, taken it 1 day on, 2 days off. Uh, and you can see it varies over time. I'm comfortable with the 5 days on, 2 days off. That's considered a Stamets protocol. We're talking about Paul Stamets here, who is has written a number of books on mushrooms and not just psychoactive mushrooms or psilocybin mushrooms, but he's written about all kinds of fungi. He's got a number of books out there. I'd recommend reading any one of them.
Yeah, mycology in general.
Yeah.
Yeah, mycelium running is a great one.
Excellent book that talks about how integral fungi is to the whole cycle of life, and being able to mitigate the kinds of horrible things we've been doing to the planet. Fungi can actually eat a bunch of that nasty stuff up. But yeah, Stamets has a protocol for mushrooms: 5 days on, 5 days, 2 days off, and then repeat. The microdose that you take, you may find that over time it's either too much or not enough. It's going to take a few weeks to figure that out. People start recommended dose at 50 milligrams to 100 milligrams. I recommend 100. If it's too much, you'll know it. Your first microdose, set it for a day that you're not doing anything. Not necessarily not doing anything, but you're not doing anything important. And give yourself at least a few hours, couple of hours before you need to drive anywhere, just in case it affects you in a way that you don't like or you don't want. I haven't heard of many people having problems with 100 milligrams, but some have, and it's too much. Some take it way lower than that, and others go way higher than that.
One of the reasons why people don't get benefit from psilocybin, especially in the beginning, is they're going to use these things with their old ego intact. And so it's very difficult to ask somebody, what's your intentions? What's this? Because if they really knew what they needed, they wouldn't need to be doing this. And if they're trying to do this with that old ego intact, they're probably going to approach these things the wrong way. For me, I just want people to kind of take this as a vitamin C or a vitamin or a calcium supplement. It's not going to affect you. I'm telling you, it's not going to affect you. It's not going to make your day to day. You know, of course, like John's saying, try it out in the beginning so you find out where your dose is and then get your dose lined up. And usually, if you get your dose lined up, it doesn't affect you. And I would much rather people come to use psilocybin without a robust bout of intentions or what they want to get out of it. And I can use myself as a prime example. I wanted the mushies to take care of my chronic migraines. And because, and this is another reason why I ask people not to get too intention induced, they did not do anything for my migraines in the first 5 or 6 macro doses and the first probably 50 or so microdoses, because they weren't doing directly what I wanted. The ego that I had in place that was a jackass, I want ego, I was frustrated and pissed off. And basically I was kind of happy. The ego I had was happy that psilocybin wasn't doing what I wanted, so I could put it on the shelf of things. I told you it wouldn't work. I told you it wouldn't work. So I would much rather people do a couple of these things is when you come to using psilocybin, even in a microdose, is get a community. And that community could be one person. I would love it to be 2 or 3 people, but be the community that people that are actually, one, reading about psilocybin, two, they're also kind of the idea that this was all bullshit, this was illegal. Just because when you start to get those shifts on that early ego, they're not drastic shifts and the ego is going to fight them. But if you have community to go talk to Brian or go talk to Alex and say, hey, Alex, I'm taking this microdose and I'm having this feeling. Is that something you did? Or is that something have you read about that? Versus going to your buddy or your friend or your even your partner who has no idea what psilocybin is and is kind of in the naysay side of psilocybin. Because as soon as you get that initial shift, and I'll use myself as an example, the initial shift that I first saw that frustrated me and pissed me off because it didn't do anything for my pain was I noticed my addiction to alcohol that I hadn't drank for 12 years completely disappeared. My anxiety, my drive, my guilt, my shame, all that was there 12 years sober when I started using psychedelics. But the first time is that shame and stuff all disappeared. And I got kind of pissed off, and I actually got pissed off with the mushroom. I had a conversation, off the mushroom, just talking to myself. What the hell is that about my addiction? I asked you to take care of my pain. And it took me probably 6 months to a year of microdosing and incrementally macrodosing to actually get to a dialogue changed enough in my head that says, holy shit, part of my suffering was my old addictions, because those old dialogues about my addiction also were same dialogues that were about my chronic pain. So one of the things I have to tell people is if you really knew what you needed, you wouldn't need to use these things. So be very open, no matter how intention driven you are of using these, be very open that this thing over here is changing and this thing over here is changing, because a lot of times those sub things they're changing that you're not really wanting to change are actually helping the primary thing that you're actually intending to want to change. So community is huge. Knowing that when you come to this stuff, you have your intact ego in place, and knowing that it's going to change, and you need to be able to get to the point where, another thing that I tell people is psilocybin tends to show people what they need, not what they want. And it's for you as the person to be aware of, oh, I need that. Because if it doesn't show you what you want, you kind of put the need off to the side. And it took me about 6 months to a year again of using psychedelics, primarily psilocybin, that I actually came back and looked back at things that were in my early stages of using psilocybin and went, oh shit, I was told exactly what I needed, but it didn't settle well with me. So I said, fuck, I don't want that. Put that over here. And when it showed me a little bit of what I wanted, I hold on to that too tightly and really didn't get what I needed. So with that said, I can stop there.
And
No, that's great.
I'd like to pick up there and say that intention is important. When you go, if you're just going to do it for the hell of it, how would I put it? If you don't know where you're going, any place you get is there, right? I mean, so going in with an intention is fine, and Blaine is correct. Things may come out differently than you expected, and they certainly are. Again, microdosing is very subtle. The changes will come from the sides, from above, from below. I mean, there are all kinds of different angles, and it takes self-observation to see what's changing. And then I'm going to take that further into community is extremely important. And who you choose to share your experiences with is also very important. If there's any kind of reticence about using psychedelics, I mean, you may have good friends who, if you talk to them, I'm doing microdosing with mushrooms or LSD for that matter, and we'll talk about that later. They may not like, it may just freak them out. You'll find if you have friends who are doing AA, the typical 12-step program, and talk to them about using microdosing of any sort, you may get quite negative reaction. I'm just saying be careful with the people that you discuss this with, because some may or may not be may or may not support you in the process, and you need to be working with people who do support you in the process.
Yeah, and
Sure.
having people that will create a sense of anxiety because they now know that's not good for any future journeys as well. I just want to say the intentionality you guys were talking about. I know for Alex and myself, a huge part of our process was we would actually spend part of the day meditating to figure out what it was that we didn't know. And it wasn't like we didn't know because we hadn't put time into it. Like, what do you straight up not know how to do? You know what I mean? And we would try to use the medicine to like help illuminate. Like you mentioned community being important. That was one of the things we had agreed on that we didn't know how to do. How do you build the community? And so we actually spent the day kind of meditating on that, and using the medicine to better understand what that looks like. And here we are like 2 years later. So yeah, it's fascinating what happens when you put a little bit of intentionality behind it.
Yeah, I do like that you guys both took turns on having the intention, but also the open-mindedness of allowing it to present to you something that needs to be fixed, because I do try to be deliberate and intentional and have something in mind. I'll be like, why am I feeling insecure? What could be something I could uproot using this medicine, and it'll show me something completely different. And it's in those moments that you could either decide to, this is not what I want, this is push it out and like restrict yourself from that, or being open-minded and allowing changes or something just to be brought forth into your the front of your consciousness to be able to address. And there's benefits for both. And so it's not like you might be the train conductor, but it's not like you're able to anticipate every single thing that's going to be coming forward. And people that are taking a macrodose, this is what might translate into being a bad trip, because they're being presented with something that they are not really interested in confronting right now. But I'd like to quickly address a question in the chat. Is someone asked, do you just count the weight? Is potency calculated? I grew my own, but I don't know how to determine potency.
I would say, I'm assuming you're using a psilocybin strain of one form or another. And if it a golden teacher B plus, even okay, golden teacher. I wouldn't worry about the potency. Typically, they run a regular range. Use it, go by weight. And I think Blaine is pulling out, and I'm going to pull out a little. This is a scale. Use a scale. I'm assuming, AJ, that you have a scale. It's really important for anybody who's microdosing to, and for those of you, the other folks on the call, pick one of these up. They're about $20 on Amazon. Get it a milligram scale, which means it will measure to 3 decimal points out, 000, and use the weight. Typically, just go by 100 if that's not enough. Boost it by 50 or 100 if you want to play with that. I recommend doing it in 50 milligram chunks in terms of determining where it is, what your dose is. The potency is going to change whenever you change. For instance, if you get an X amount of psilocybin and you grind it up and put it in capsules, or you just buy the capsules, the potency is going to change from batch to batch. It will change from mushroom to mushroom if you're getting them raw, for that matter. I mean, if you're growing them and just eating them, which is why people will, once they're dried, will grind them up and you have a homogeneous mix that will be at a basic potency. And that really is, it's how it affects you. It's how, whatever that potency is at a given milligram weight, if you find that sweet spot for you, use that until it runs out. And the next time you change batches, you're going to go through that again, but it's going to be quicker because you're going to know what the how the effects are for you. And they're not going to be, as long as you're staying within the psilocybin strain, you're not going to be getting a huge range of difference in terms of potency. It's going to be relatively close, and I wouldn't worry that much about it. And I think, Blaine, you've been waving the container there.
Well, what I was just going to say is going by weight, these are 100 milligram capsules of penis envy, okay? And I have that labeled as that because I know that this 100 milligrams by weight is going to be about 200 to 300 milligrams by weight of golden teachers. I know this because I've messed with mushrooms for the last 7 or 8 years. So to give you an idea, whenever we're talking about milligrams of 25 milligrams of psilocybin, you're usually talking synthetic when you're talking about trials and your studies. And so Matthew Johnson, which is the person I follow, he's with the Johns Hopkins studies. He says that 25 milligrams of the synthetic is about equivalent to 5 grams of golden teachers. Mm-hmm. So if you break the math down, there's about a half a milligram of psilocybin in every 100 milligrams of dried golden teachers. So if you want to get, AJ, if you want to get really sciencey like I am, in 100 milligrams of golden teachers is about a half a milligram of psilocybin. Going back to what John says, though, to make sure that equivalent is accurate, you're going to need to take 10 to 14 grams of mushrooms at once and grind it all together so it's consistent throughout that 100 milligrams and consistent throughout that 14 grams. If someone just pulls one mushroom out of a baggie, puts it on a scale, and weighs it out to 100 milligrams and does this as their microdosing practice, they're going to have so much more difficult time of feeling comfortable about their microdoses, because from microdose to microdose can be such a difference of the amount of psilocybin and effectiveness. So it's better to have it weighed out in capsules so that it's very, very consistently the same amount. And again, if you switch from the next batch of mushrooms and we do another 14 grams, you grind them up. Note again that this might be a little different. I might have to adjust my dose by 50 milligrams to 100 milligrams. I hope that helps.
Yeah, I like to throw those suckers in a blender and set aside my encapsulation rig. I'm not sure what you use, Blaine, but I like the 00. It's kind of fit me right as far as the encapsulation size. And then after I've made my batch, I throw like 10 out of the 100 onto the scale and try to just get the average of what the weight is after I tare the weight of the capsule, and then I kind of have a better idea of what I'm working with. So I hope that helped.
Just kind of sticking with the science theme, Blaine, I was wondering if you might be able to talk a little bit about some of the neurological interactions that are taking place when you're microdosing, just to give people some context to understand what's happening inside your body physiologically as a result of these small pills.
Well, one of the things I'll talk about when we're talking about physiologically, about the brain and how things work, is that microdosing, and we'll talk about tolerance real quick too. Tolerance is a psychological feeling more than it's a biological, meaning that too often when people microdose, they don't feel it. And if they're microdosing like on a regimen like John is doing every day or every other day, they get a point where they actually feel tolerance. And they say, well, it's just not work. I've been taking it, Blaine, for 3 weeks now, and in the beginning, it was really working, but now it's not working anymore. And this is where the anti-inflammatory properties, the neuroplasticity properties of psilocybin, you don't need to feel it. And this is, again, going back to another reason why I like microdosing is if someone is on an SSRI, on a gabapentin, on an anticonvulsant, and an antipsychotic, any of these type of brain drugs, and you macrodose, it can be dangerous. There's nothing that shows any danger in microdosing. And when you microdose, even though you're taking these other drugs, I still see people getting neuroplasticity. I've seen people with Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and a few other dimensional, issues microdose, and not necessarily the person themselves comes back to me and says something. It's usually the caregiver who's monitoring this person saying, Blaine, I don't think they notice it, but they're not doing this as much as they used to, or they've seen some neuroplasticity, some kind of neural change happen in the brain. I had a stroke, 2 brain surgeries, and it wasn't until I used psychedelics that I actually feel like my cognitive abilities are better than it was before my stroke today.
Mm.
And that to me alone kind of still scares the shit out of me, that this stuff is not able to be used by more people. And we'll get a little, I'm going to get a little bit off of this, but because the neuroplasticity is something I'm very keen about that I look at. They're putting DMT in injections in ambulances. It hasn't been yet, but it's in the process for stroke victims to get that DMT in their system right after a stroke, and seeing that it could be possibly the game changer to having a huge downside of a post-stroke versus not having DMT in the system. DMT, if you're not familiar with it, it's a molecule that we make ourselves. It's also the active ingredient in ayahuasca, if you're familiar with the word ayahuasca. So for me, I have seen also a lot of people that are older. And when I say older, I know I offend some people when I say 70 years old is older because they don't want to hear that. But people that are in their 70s and 80s, I've had them just microdose and come back to me and tell me, Blaine, it's not doing anything. But I started a non-for-profit that I've been thinking about starting for 10 years. Oh, and I'm doing this too. Is that what the psilocybin is supposed to do? And it's just time and time again, they have this internal change. And I don't tell this to everybody, but a lot of times is what I notice in these people is their dirty dialogue and their dirty pain, even though they're not in chronic pain, has changed and has allowed things in their lives to come out that hadn't. One of my most favorite older people, 84 years old, Catholic school teacher, retired. I didn't want to give her microdosing because of her age and also because of who she was as a Catholic school teacher. I felt a little bit of a guilt in my own personal way of not wanting to give her microdosing. But she did enough research that she sparked me enough to go, okay, Anne, I'm going to give it to you. Now, I'll be brief about this story. Anne was, 84 years old, so she was born in the time, the 30s and 40s is when she was an adolescent in grade school. In that time, it was evil to be left-handed. They thought of it as left-handed people were evil. She's left-handed, so every time she tied her shoelaces, the nuns would slap her to get her to stop tying left-handed because she's evil if she's left-handed. Unconsciously, this beautiful person at the age of 6 or 7 decided she's never going to buy shoes with laces. And women can do this more so than men. But so she's 84 years old in a shoe store, calls me up, and she's dancing in a shoe store, and the people in the shoe store are worried about her because she can't stop dancing because it's the first pair of shoes she's worn with laces on them. It's the first pair of shoes she's worn with laces on them, and it's the first pair of shoes she's ever bought. And this is where I go to that neuroplasticity and that neuro tracks that get it changed. She only microdosed. She's one of those rare that I never had any microdosing done with her. Only microdosed was enough to change that neural pathways that said to her unconsciously, don't buy shoes with laces, don't buy shoes with laces. To the point where she bought the shoes with laces and couldn't stop dancing because it was so joyful for her. So yeah, I believe there's some serious neuroplasticity changes in people in microdosing alone. If you can add macrodosing to it, I think it can put gas on the fire, but microdosing alone can do some neuro changes that is amazing in what I've seen so far.
I've seen some research showing that, like, essentially when you take these psychedelics, you're like temporarily altering your genetic expression. So like if you have like damaged serotonin receptors or, your TRKB receptors all messed up, that this stuff can actually like alter how it expresses itself for like 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. So it's like you get this residual effect where it has like this ongoing neural response, but then at a certain point in time it diminishes. So it seems like this is something you have to keep going back for, which is, so you had mentioned 15 days for the microdosing for the person you'd mentioned. Do you take any breaks with your protocol, or do you just kind of keep it as a nice even keeled dose?
That again, you're getting back to people's individual experiences. And I have taken breaks. They've been a week, 2 weeks at a time. I know other people who've taken month or multiple month-long breaks. Some have taken year-long breaks. Um, it's it's a practice that it's part of a practice of what you do. You know, maybe you bicycle for your exercise, right? And then you decide you don't want to bicycle anymore, or hell, the winter comes along, it's too cold. I'm going to walk. I'm going to do, go to the gym, whatever. It's sort of analogous to that. It's part of an internal, ongoing self-care, um, reawakening or awakening to potentials that you may have had or wanted to increase, whatever. And microdosing will help you do that. I don't know if that answers the question, but
Yeah, absolutely.
I also wanted to say, along with what Blaine had just said, is that we have seen anecdotally a large number of people who have been struggling with SSRIs or NSRIs, uh, because, I mean, folks take that and it's often a years long struggle to get away from them. And I know many of you out there know people who've been struggling with the standard antidepressant medications that are out there. And one thing I can say is that those drugs can interfere with the experience of a macrodose um, of either LSD or psilocybin. You may need to take more in order to have the same experience as someone who doesn't take those drugs. On the other hand, and this is important, microdosing has been found by many people, and again, this is anecdotal, there's no studies out there. Um, it has helped dramatically in their ability to wean off of those drugs. You can't just stop those drugs because that'll screw you up big time too. Um, uh, they have been microdosing and have found that they are more easily can move from them and they do it at a more rapid pace. So just a little side there. Greg has a question here. I'm a total newbie. I'm investigating my first macrodose with a guide for $500. Is this the best path? How soon should I microdose if I do? And I will say that a few things. This will be obviously at $500 for a macro dose that's in the underground, that you're working with an underground guide, and that's fine. You need to be very, very comfortable with that person who's going to be your guide, and where you're going to do it. Basically, you need to make sure that the space is safe, that you're safe, that you're comfortable with that person. $500 is pretty much, I would say, an average to low average cost for an underground guide and journey. I would also say you need to have a couple of sessions or at least an hour long, if not 2 hour long talk with your guide about what you're looking for, basically setting the intention. And this is more important in a macro than a micro situation, but set the intention, and then set the boundaries, very clear about the boundaries. And then afterwards, you need to have somebody to talk with about integrating what you experience into your life, how what it impacted. Often you'll take a macrodose and you won't realize what you've experienced or how it affects you, often for weeks. So you need to do some integration post journey. That's really, really important. If you just take the journey, yeah, you'll get some amazing insights, but without the integration piece, those will tend to dissolve after a period of time, a month, 2 months, something like that. And you'll be back to, gee, should I do this again? Why didn't that work, etc. So,
Yeah, for myself, I feel like taking a macrodose kind of gave me a lot about myself to work on. And I feel like soon after, microdosing after that kind of just helped me in that process. That's
very
again,
good
that's
point. Very good point. I mean, microdosing, and this gets to Greg, your question, how soon should I microdose if I do? I would say start microdosing now, if you have the capability to do that. Going into, it will actually sort of grease the skids, if you will, going into your macrodose. But taking occasional macrodoses while you're microdosing does two things. It helps the microdose do its work, and it's subtle again, but it does. But what also happens is the microdosing helps the macrodose, and your integration of that experience continuing as you go on, just as you were saying, Alex, that the microdose seem to help you pull those experiences in and see how they relate to your daily life. So, start it now and continue from there. Just go on from there. And pop those macrodoses in there every, 3, 6, whatever months that you want to do that. And that's all up to you. Again, you're the physician, the patient, and the pharmacist.
Greg goes on to ask about what do we mean by boundaries? Can you give some insights on some things to consider to keep in mind when dealing with a guy that they might not have really known for very long, or maybe possibly just met?
Yeah, sure. I'll toss some things out. Talking. How much talking is going to go on? Do you want that guy to actually inject themselves into what you're doing and make interpretations about what's happening to you, or would you rather have them silent? Or any range in between. That's important. Touch, extremely important. Are you going to allow someone to hold your hand or hug you? There should be absolutely no sexual contact of any kind. Music, what kind of music? And then really basic things. You want to do this indoors or outdoors? You want to do this during the day? You want to do it during the night? Do you want a blindfold? Do you not want a blindfold? What kind of music? Whatever it is that's important for you to feel safe and comfortable, to not worry about what's going on. Be clear about, do you want juice? Do you want water? What do you want to have available to nosh on? Because that's something that a guide should help with. If you're hungry or whatever, to have them, and we're getting way, way away from microdosing here, but all that stuff is important. And Blaine, go ahead.
I wanted to say something about the microdosing before a macrodose. And when you're talking about, Greg, when you're talking about a complete newbie, or if you're talking about somebody who's in their X age, and I did mushrooms in my 19 something or other age, 20, 30 years ago, most people that did mushrooms when they were younger didn't weigh anything. They took a handful of fungus out of a bag and took it, and they got high. So one of the reasons why I encourage people to microdose the first 2 or 3 weeks before a macrodose is because it will allow them to kind of get a feeling for what it is this stuff does. When you have no idea, you have no idea. 2, it allows you to find a little bit of an idea of what your dose is. So like my friend Morgan, she can't take any more than 25 milligrams of ground up cubensis mushrooms without feeling uncomfortable. That's an extremely low microdose. And I'm so glad that she did this to find out that she shouldn't take more than 1 gram or 1.5 grams of a macrodose. She took only 3/4 gram of psilocybin mushrooms, 3/4 gram, which would be most people's museum dose or even a heavy microdose. And she was in a full-on journey for 5 hours for 3/4 gram of mushrooms. So another reason to microdose, especially if you're a newbie, is if you microdose and you get up to 200 or 300 milligrams and it doesn't really phase you at all, then 3 to 5 grams of mushrooms is probably going to be a good dose for you. You kind of get that idea. Okay, now microdosing after a macrodose. I was saying this for years, but Paul Stamets has stepped on board, and he started saying it a couple of years ago and made me even feel better about what I was saying. Is a macrodose is 5 hours of insightful information, downloads of thoughts, craziness, hallucinations. And if anybody can ever take back 5%, even 5% of that macrodose, and completely be able to have a communication with somebody. Oh, I experienced this and this and this and this and this and this and this. Still, no matter if they sat there for an hour telling what they experienced, they're still only touching at like 5% of what they really experienced. The microdosing for that first 2 to 6 weeks after a macrodose can bubble up insightfulness and ideas from the macrodose that went right by you because you were paying attention to this hallucination over here, or this thing went right by you over here. And now that you're microdosing in a sub-perceptual level, that insight pops up again. And now you can hold space for it for an hour, 2 hours on just that one idea, that one concept that blew by you in the macrodose. So time and time again, integration is pivotal, and integration usually is pivotal to do with somebody else. But I have seen integration happen just by simply microdosing after a macrodose. And I'm good there.
It often allows, going from what you were saying, Blaine, that microdose after the macrodose, with those things that bubble up, often bubble up in the connection between something you experienced and maybe not remembered from that journey, that connection to what that download of information was, how it connects directly into your life and how you're living your life, etc. Or trauma from the past. I mean, those connections seem to be made almost, they come with it when you're doing the microdose post macrodose.
Yeah, and as far as Brian threw up a trip sitter link, there's some good stuff that you can find online. I've been looking through a couple of different types of like printed literature, and it might not be focused so much exactly on microdosing, but there's like navigating psychedelic journal type stuff that you could look into, get some insights on what you might be wanting to, as far as the attention side, what you might want to be looking at, and then the way of the psychonaut. These are just like good insights just to consider when you're trying to be intentional with this, with these types of tools. I'm looking at the clock. It's 10 past noon. I want to be respectful of you guys' time, but something that we didn't talk too much on, that I really wanted to ask you guys is LSD in comparison to psilocybin. I feel like they're two different sides of the same coin. I've been actually, during my practice, I've been trying to put in an eloquent way how they're different and how they're similar. And I'm having a hard time finding the words. Do you guys have, just through your experience, have any insights on when or how to use one compared to the other? And what are your thoughts on LSD?
We both have thoughts on that, I'm sure. And I'll just get to the first thing I'll say is that LSD is a much more potent drug. You're going to take 1/100th of the amount that you would if you were using psilocybin. In other words, standard dose, standard clinical dose, you want to call it that, for LSD, as I said before, is 100 to 125 micrograms, not milligrams, micrograms. And that means that this tends to be much more directly relatable. The standard microdose then is 10 to 12 and a half or 13 micrograms. And it's done typically on a different schedule. This was James Fadiman, is the person who was doing research, still does do research around LSD. And his recommendation, because LSD, Blaine alluded to or talked about a little bit, tolerance. LSD can build a tolerance. It sort of has its own governor built right into it. If you take a lot of LSD over a short period of time, it's going to stop working. It's just going to say nope. And they don't understand the mechanisms yet. And because of the weirdness that's gone on over the last 50 years, LSD still has the bad boy on the block reputation. People don't want to touch it yet. Although it's a fascinating chemical and does amazing things, and amazing stuff has been done with it. You alluded to, Alex, Stan Groff and The Way of the Psychonaut, which is a 2-volume, really heavy but very, very good set of work by Stan Groff, who was a pioneer. Sandoz was passing out LSD back in the 50s, and he got a hold of it and used it, and then used it on patients like schizophrenics and terminal cancer patients. And he's got amazing stuff that he learned from that. And anyway, I'm getting off the subject here. Differences between psilocybin and LSD. In terms of microdosing, remember we're talking subperceptual here. So you're not going to feel anything when you take it any different than you would either one. But the subtle differences, I would say, are that psilocybin, this is going to sound strange, psilocybin is a softer drug. It's going to give you, over time, the insights are going to be more of an emotional context, and LSD more of an intellectual context. It's hard to, both will do very advantageous things for you. Both can make your emotional state better, more balanced, whatever. And they can help with the chronic pain issues, the dirty pain versus clean pain. It's worked for me with both of them. I'm sort of, it's hard. It's like describing what happened when you did that trip, right? You can talk for an hour with someone you trust about what happened, and you're only going to get 5%. You're only going to be talking about a fraction of the 5% that you remembered. So it's hard for me it's hard to put into words. But I would say that one is softer, one is a little harder, and I don't mean harder in a negative sense. I mean harder in sort of a more focused sense. I guess that's a better word.
Well, and just duration wise too, you're looking at like 4 to 6 hours as compared to like 8 to 12. So potency wise, yeah.
Yeah, well, that's in a macro dose. Okay, so
Yeah,
we're talking
macro,
about
yeah,
microdose.
yeah.
Though, we're also talking about different protocols. I don't know anybody who's done LSD that hasn't done the 1 day on, 2 days off. In other words, you take it every third day. I don't know anybody who's changed that protocol, although I'm thinking about it. Blaine, what do you have to say?
All right. When we're talking about LSD, one of the hard parts is getting your dose correct. Okay, I take a 1 ounce tincture bottle that has now 600 mics. That's 600 micrograms of LSD in it, and 1 ounce of liquid. This is distilled water with 600 micrograms of LSD. I know that 1 mil, there's 30 mils, and this gets all in the math. There's 30 mils in 1 ounce. So each mil is 20 micrograms. I start people off at a 1/4 mil, which is 5 micrograms. And 5 micrograms can be overwhelmingly too much for some people and can be not even nothing to others. So what's the biggest difference in these two drugs, psilocybin versus LSD? The most and largest, biggest difference is psilocybin is a 5-HT2A receptor, serotonin receptor, mainly drug. Now, LSD is about a 50-50 mix with serotonin and dopamine. And this is where people, when they microdose LSD, myself included, you'll forget you microdosed because it's so subperceptual. But then all of a sudden you'll be sitting there an hour later and go, oh, I got to go do that. You don't even realize all of a sudden you're just so energetic to go do something. That is the dopamine in it. So I have a lot of people, to go a little bit off of talking about certain things, ADHD patients who get a hold of LSD and microdosing find it to be some of the best medicine to Adderall and these other stimulants, because they can guide it, they can govern it a lot better. Another thing, when you're talking about longevity, which Brian got into, but you guys kind of didn't really get into it, is psilocybin, even in the subperceptual, is only about 2 hours. now. Now that I say that out loud, people will say the next day they actually feel something from the medicine, even on a microdose. But it's so perceptual. What they feel isn't like a high or a feeling of psychological. It's just they feel still a little bit of the resonance of that serotonin, an agonistic serotonin feeling. So when it comes to LSD, I have a lot of people, because Mr. Hoffman, when he first was trying to find LSD, the molecule, he was looking for a headache reliever. And because I deal with migraines myself and other people, I have a lot of people that swear by LSD being a headache elixir on top of being a microdosing regimen. And I have 2 people that microdose LSD every other day tell me that they no longer feel it anymore, but still get the headache relief. Now, are they getting other reliefs? Would they benefit if they took it every 3rd day? I can never convince them to do that because of how much headache relief they get. But going back to it, the biggest difference is dopamine in LSD is going to make you more motivated. If I have a day, because I don't microdose LSD all that often, maybe 5 times a month, but if I have a day where I have to make 2 or 3 batches of cookies for my cancer patients, I will try to put that batch day on my microdosing LSD day, just to give me that more focus and more motivation. Also, when you're talking about, John, talking about the intellectual side of it, because of the dopamine, it gives you a lot more focus. And that's where it can be feeling a more intellectual and more driven type medicine, where psilocybin kind of just lets you feel more loosey or goosey, and more openness, more awareness, more open, where LSD makes you kind of fine tune into something. And you could really, if you were researching something and you microdosed LSD, you may notice that day of that research seems to be much more focused and much more intense. I hope that helps.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you. For myself, like I said, I've been trying to put it into words of like, what is it? How are these different as far as how I'm perceiving them? And of course, doing a microdose, you're not perceiving a whole lot, but on the macrodose level, just trying to differentiate the two. I feel like psilocybin is much more of like feeling connected to things, being like open-minded, seeing the connection between myself and the rest of life, my relationships and whatnot. But LSD is kind of like the opposite side of that coin. It's kind of like psilocybin is the inhale, and LSD is like the exhale of like shedding labels and attachments to things, at least in my perception of just, well, attachment in general to things, and how and in that way I'm able to analyze how things are serving me in my life, and I'm able to kind of make some decisions based off of those experiences. But let me see. Greg, as far as your MDMA question, that's not really the topic, but I will say that the Portland VA that's doing their MDMA psilocybin studies for combat PTSD, when it comes to combat PTSD, a lot of people that are going to be in there are angry, dealing with stuff like moral injury, stuff like that. And MDMA, from the conversations we've had from like Dan Friedrich, I think it was October or November, with a SNAP lab, those people that are actually doing those studies, people are, the MDMA is putting them in a position that they're able to open up and address and recall like problematic, traumatic parts of their past, and hold these situations in their consciousness while not being so not being hurt by remembering and recalling the situation. So in that way, they're able to kind of talk through it and address some things a little bit easier without being triggered, for lack of a better way. Was someone going to chime in right there?
It's addressing trauma, but in a way that you're depersonalizing the trauma. So instead of it being that happened to me, it's kind of like looking at it from a more elevated position, and you're able to kind of examine it a bit more thoroughly. But yeah, this all goes to the ego. Like the best way I've heard it is these psychedelics, they take the ego out of the foreground and they put them into the background. So you're able to actually more effectively consider and look at what's happened to you. So, I mean, micro, macro, somewhere in the middle. That's kind of what's going on. Also, both of these drugs have antidepressant effects, which is what I really think makes them so similar. Both of them bind with the TRKB gene like 1,000 times better than any other psychedelic. And that is actually what gives you the long-term antidepressant effect as well. So these two drugs are unique in that they interact with those genes better than any other psychedelic, including SSRIs, literally 1,000 times better than SSRIs. So that's kind of some of the long-term response that you're getting as well.
And, anecdotally, I've done MDMA and psilocybin together. Concurrently is a little, not concurrently per se. I started with MDMA, finished with psilocybin. And it's interesting what some people have a sort of, with psilocybin, there's a bit of anxiety at the beginning, which can happen half an hour to an hour into it. It takes a half an hour for it to take effect, typically. And that being the case, some people, I mean, you get, oh my God, am I going to have a bad trip, etc. Those sort of voices can go on in your head. There's also, I have felt physically some agitation from psilocybin. MDMA takes care of that. You don't have to, you don't deal with that. Your MDMA comes on much quicker. I find it to be very mellow myself. I'm using nebulous terms here, but and then you go into the psilocybin. A number of people have problems coming down off of MDMA. There's my wife, for instance, feels that her skin isn't her own. She's not, it doesn't feel right at all. It's a very, very uncomfortable feeling with psilocybin taken about an hour or so, 2 hours after the MDMA. You miss that anxiety of the ramp up, and the coming down off of the MDMA is covered by the psilocybin at that point. And it makes for a very comfortable, interesting journey. I haven't seen, I mean, there's no studies out there about combining any of these things and what they do. But anecdotally, at least in my life and other people I've talked to, and Blaine has also, that MDMA psilocybin journey is okay. Blaine, I don't know if you have anything to say about that either, but yeah.
Well, I was going to quickly say is you can actually Google MDMA transdermal patches. They're not out there. They're not legal. They're not FDA approved. But I think this is going to be one of the first microdosing regimen that is going to be approved, which is where most people do not think about microdosing is MDMA, because it is extremely difficult. And I tell everybody, do not try to microdose MDMA. But when people have come to me that have been doing psychedelics for a period of time and want to look at trying this as an attribute or see if it could do something different than what the other medicines do, I will sit down to and explain to them how to microdose MDMA. But it's not one of those things that I ever tell anybody this is where you should start out at, or is it a great practice, or is there any kind of truth that we understand that MDMA can be microdosed? But I have seen it done, and I've seen it done in the doses that are extremely low. You know, they're even lower than the 0.1% or the 1/10 that we microdose other of these medicines in. And when you're talking about combining these things, one of the things I always tell people, you can combine them in micro and macro, but it's all about dose. So when you're looking at combining MDMA with psilocybin, the factor that John is talking about is MDMA turns off the fight or flight. So that angst of, oh, what's going on? Oh, everything's beautiful. Nothing's bothering me. That's the MDMA turning it off. And I tell people, if you're looking for the best, what I consider some of the best healing is to go dominant psilocybin and go about a half a dose of MDMA. What that looks like is about 3 to 5 grams of mushrooms with about 60 milligrams of MDMA. Doing the MDMA approximately a half hour to 45 minutes before you do the psilocybin. Those would be some of my regimens of how I recommend doing it. Now, I have a few people, like John has just alluded to, that I have not tried it myself, but they have microdosed psilocybin with the MDMA and had much better coming off of the MDMA. Now, this is the farthest thing from studies or research out there, but about anywhere from about 200 to 500 milligrams of psilocybin, about 3 to 4 hours into a MDMA journey, has shown to be some extremely beneficial of the MDMA coming down, of being less agoniistic or less agitated or less not feeling like you're in your own skin. And then what that is a serotonin depletion, which doesn't make any sense to me at all, that you're having a serotonin depletion and adding another serotonergic drug like psilocybin would benefit that on the come down. I'm not really sure if that just because the serotonin maybe jacks
I can
up.
explain what's going on there. It's actually similar to lysergic and psilocybin with DMT and also MDMA. Both lysergic and psilocybin are they switch on your 5-HT2A serotonin receptor. And then when you add DMT or MDMA, both of those are serotonin agonists, which will drain out your serotonin. But now your receptors are primed to receive the serotonin in a way that they've not received before, which is like you getting that nice warm hug that you haven't felt in years. So it's the interaction between those two drugs. Lysergic and DMT will have the same kind of interaction where you'll get pretty crazy benefits off of incorporating the two, because it turns on the receptor, and then the other drug creates an agonist for the serotonin that just floods your body with it.
Yeah, to be honest, I've only spent very little time considering the combination of like MDMA and psilocybin. But now that hearing you speak, Blaine, I'm thinking that would totally shed someone of that fear and help with the submitting to the experience, opening up, being open-minded to it, and there could be a lot of benefit to that. I think this has been a great show. I appreciate you guys for coming on. Is there any things of note that you guys that's on your mind that maybe we didn't harp on that you might want to mention? Anything like that?
I can't say it enough. Dose is important. Know your dose. The other is know your supplier. There's not a lot of money to be made in compromising psilocybin, but other drugs. It is important to know who your source is and to trust that source. But again, knowing the dose that you're taking is really important. You can't just rip off a piece of mushroom and say, I guess that's going to be enough. And if you're doing LSD, cutting up a piece of bladder isn't going to work either. If you're going to do, if you want to do LSD and you're starting from a hit or 2 or 5, whatever, dissolve it in water or alcohol so that you can take that. You can do 10 milliliters and you get 1 milliliter is going to be 1 microdose. If you dissolve it in 10 milliliters, you can do it. If that's too small to deal with, you can do 20 or 100. You do the math. The math is pretty simple, in which we're talking about 1/10 of whatever the dose is. But do track your doses. And I put into the chat a Google, it's actually excuse me, an Excel spreadsheet that has checkboxes basically for things to think about and things to keep track of in terms of your microdose experience over time. It is very anal. I mean, there's a lot of checkboxes there, but it's worth looking at the kinds of things you do want to think about and keep track of while you're microdosing, because it really will make a difference over time when you go back and look at it.
I love this famous quote was said to me, and ever since I heard this quote, the old Blaine would have said this is so corny and so stupid. I almost came to tears when I heard this quote, and I was doing psychedelics over 3 years already, so I heard this about 5 years ago. Psychedelics allows you to grow into the flower that you were meant to be. And that is so true in so many people I've seen over the years. They grow into something that was shoved away or told they couldn't be in their adolescence, and they became something else. And psychedelics opened up those pathways to go back to that beautiful person that they were once and grow back into that beautiful thing that they were. So water your plant well and fertilize it with psychedelics, because it will grow into something beautiful if you actually use these medicines. And another thing I try to tell people is, if you love exactly the person you are and you don't want to change anything about you, please don't touch these. These are going to change your mind, period. They are going to change your mind.
And remember, the seed doesn't look anything like the flower.
Thank you, John and Blaine, for joining us today and sharing your guys' insight, and the audience for you guys' questions that you guys asked. If you're going to be watching this on YouTube and would like to join us live for a show, feel free to check out our meetup page. I'll leave a link for that. And you could check our calendar and see what future guests we might have to anticipate our shows. We meet on the third Sunday of every month at 11. And with that, I appreciate everyone for joining us. Have a good one.